welcome to another Sunday Superversive live stream. I am your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and I want to thank you all for joining me. Today I am with Anthony Marquetta. Anthony, how are you doing today?
I've never had a bad day in my life.
I've got my microphone up close to my face, much too close, uncomfortably close. The microphone is politely but firmly asking me to leave, but I will not. Uh, Wait a minute. Test. Oh wait, I think I've unlocked it. It was on the wrong microphone because I updated my dang OBS again, and it never
Oh,
ends.
is that why you were so quiet last week?
Maybe I don't know, but I'm
Which is a
thinking of
shame, because I
you.
actually liked our discussion last week, but whatever.
Eh. So today, now that we've prevaricated enough, today we are talking about the moral physics of fairyland, the fairy law, if you will. This is a concept of ancient standing that has held true far longer than you would believe. Um, and while it doesn't have any particular roots, I believe in any one philosophy. I do believe that it has its roots within the moral framework of the Bible and of sorts God Himself, because God is Himself a holy and loving God, and thus bound by moral laws rather than anything else. And it would be a mistake to even call them laws in his case. It is physics. God cannot lie, neither can the fairies, and so on and so forth. For God to do evil would make him something less than God and be utterly, utterly what's the word I want? Inconceivable. And I think that that is a connection. Hey, hey, Megabuster Shepherd. And that I believe is a connection between how fairies perceive the moral law and their moral physics, as well as with the old religion. What do you think, Anthony?
I would agree. I'm also going to posit another theory here as to why we see this so consistent between cultures, which is that fairies do in fact exist.
Yep.
I offer this not as either true or false, merely as a theory that I consider plausible.
Yep. I absolutely do believe it. You know, it's like one of those things where you look at things enough and you decide, I think that all those stories are true. Like you hear about XYZ who was randomly killed after he uncovered a fairy mound, and it's like he found some treasure, but then he dies of a heart attack a year later. Now, of course, that could just be the fact that he was an unhealthy Irishman, but at the same time, you don't really know. Like sometimes these things get so mixed up that you're like, I don't know if it is, I don't know if it is false. I don't know if these things don't exist or do exist. I just know that Nemesis got a hold of them or some other misfortune.
I mean, I suppose. I don't know. I would need to look into like individual stories to see. I will say, I think it was John C. Wright who pointed out, I have known more people who have seen ghosts than whales. So, if your criteria is testimony from others, well, there you go. I believe it was Chesterton who we're going to talk about because he has some words on the subject. But
Yep.
I believe it was Chesterton who also pointed out that if there really were psychics, he finds the idea totally plausible that they would not their powers would not work if you were to observe them. So, in other words, I don't think that he put a lot of stock into like psychic debunking and things like that. He's like, these are magical creatures. You have told you flat out that that it's not going to work if you record them. So why would you think that you could record them and work?
Right. Hello,
I
Aaron
mean,
VT. Hello, Cordell
it's
Mitchell.
Chesterton. Yeah, it's Chesterton. So he whenever it's Chesterton, whatever he says, you can assume is a lot more intelligent and a lot more poetic than however I'm paraphrasing it. But I think that was the gist of it.
Right.
I wish I could. It's going to be a hard quote to find because I'm definitely I'm severely paraphrasing it. So Googling, Chesterton on psychics will probably not bring it up, but I'll give it a shot because it
Go
was
for it.
interesting. Chesterton on psychics. If I look it up, I get a list of psychic readings in the area.
Ooh. Psychic readings in the area. Hot single psychics in your area now. They already know your number. They're looking in the
Of
window.
course, don't get me wrong. Yeah, right. Uh, don't get me wrong. I consider. Yeah, sorry. I consider pretty much all psychics to be not only frauds but despicable people.
Mm.
And that's mostly because if you have heard of a psychic, then, like, almost by definition, they must be a fraud because, again, as Chesterton has pointed out, they shouldn't really be working if you can measure it in some way. So if you're, like, advertising it, shouldn't work. So here's a fun idea, by the way. My sister has a short story. The short story is called Closure. And I love this story that she wrote, not the least of which because I came up with the ending. What? No,
Biased.
actually, yes. Actually, it's always disappointed me. She submitted it to like various things and in writing classes, and nobody else has ever appreciated it particularly. And I always thought the story was hilarious, so I'm going to tell it here. I used to post it on the Superversive SF blog every Valentine's Day and every Halloween, and you will see why in a moment. The story was about a couple who has been going around to various psychics because he wants to get married, and the guy's mother is dead. And he goes around to various psychics trying to contact his mother, but every psychic that he's been going to, it is implied, has not been has been a fraud. So finally, he goes to like a suburban soccer mom who claims to be a psychic, but this time it's the real deal.
Mm-hmm.
This is the point of the story we're at. And then she meets and he goes, "No, you can't marry this bitch." And this time, like the mother is distinctly unpleasant and does not want her to get married. And the story ends with after like they have like a cat fight, and then after that, the girlfriend who he's engaged to and the psychic. But then after the psychic comes to and the house is trashed, they go, "Well, I guess that was a fraud. Let's go." But the guy pays her and says, "No, that was definitely her." And then he
Wow.
kisses her. Well, he goes, "We're definitely getting married because I forgot just how terrible she was." And that's how the story ended. Mostly it came from like, if you watch like Long Island Medium, it's like, have you ever noticed that whenever they talk to somebody, it's always like they're always really nice and they go, "Don't worry, I support whatever decision that you made and I give you my approval," or whatever. And she's
Right.
like, "That doesn't seem realistic to me." So she wrote that story, and I came up with the ending of him being happy about it and them going off to the courthouse or whatever to get married. Uh, I've always been very disappointed that nobody seems to have really appreciated the story. Megabuster Shepherd says, "Unfortunately, unlike classic Greece and Asia Minor, the church never really went to war with the Fae the way they did when we slew Pan in the sacred groves, so the Fae run wild in America."
I don't
It's a good
believe.
fictional concept, but I'm not sure if I buy it.
So, okay. So there's actually a reasonable amount of information about this. First, the Fae are mostly limited to European areas. There are other forest and nature spirits in the Americas uh, that were suppressed mostly by Protestants unwarily. Uh, and utterly wiped out as their worshippers were also wiped out because they had no ability to save them, being demons and such. It's why you have the water dragons in China, but you also have the Fae sort of ideas. Well, it's the same continent. Of course, they'd spread there. You do have some reports of the Fae in America, but it's not nearly the same sort of way as you do in Europe. It's almost like they followed
To be honest,
their
I can't
immigrants.
comment so much. I
Mm?
don't know enough about like native North American native religions. I do know a little bit about Aztec and Maya, and I can't really recall them having a lot of fairy stories, or that might just be my lack of knowledge.
I don't think they
But
did. Um, I mean, they
I
kind of
mean,
did, but
they have a lot of they have a lot of the similar types of stories. You know, the Mayans have the twin brothers who journey into the underworld and like take on the gods. That's a big part of their mythology.
hmm
Mayan religion is often portrayed as like the nice version of the Aztec religion, and it is very much not. They also probably sacrificed people. Uh,
right.
but whatever. The at least certain areas of the Maya did probably still sacrifice people, but whatever. Uh,
Yes.
I don't know enough. I don't know a whole lot about like what they consider their fairies or whatever. Like, and then I think we should start off by defining fairy. For example, is the Jersey Devil a fairy?
No, he is a cryptid or a beast. Really, he's a
Well, do you
beast.
know the story of the Jersey Devil off the top of your head?
Not all of it. I wait. No, in fact, I'm thinking of the Mothman.
Ha. So
Sorry.
the story of all right. So the story of the Jersey Devil. I don't remember all of the details exactly, but it has to do with like a woman had 12 children, and she was when she became pregnant with a 13th, she said something like, "I hope the devil takes this one." And then when she had the child was literally the devil and like started eating people. I just paraphrased it extremely. You could go to the diner where the town supposedly took place in New Jersey and get "I dined with the Jersey Devil" T-shirts. I'm not kidding. I've never been there, but I have seen the shirts.
And you call yourself a
Uh,
New Jerseyan. It's just a picture of Snooki.
I mean, we have our hockey team, the Jersey Devils, which I actually. So I'm of two minds about the name. On one hand, I understand that it's a reference to a cryptid, and it's fairly clever. But on the other hand, like the devil is an actual real world mythological concept still believed by people today.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that they're naming it after like something that is actually believed by the dominant religion of the country is strange to me. So I always go back and forth with that name.
Right. Like it's one of those things that's like, this could be bad. But also it's like it's
I
kind
get
of
why
just
they did it.
yeah.
How innocent was it is the real question. I genuinely do not know because I don't trust anyone. Don't get me wrong.
Yep.
Uh, I don't trust that they didn't know what they were doing, but at the same time, it's like absolutely plausible that they just go, it's a clever pun. The Jersey Devil, so we'll be like devils, and the Jersey Devil is like one of the most well-known monsters of in America, actually.
Yep. And
So
and
reading
then
this,
there's things like Sasquatch. While Sasquatch does have a certain amount of connection to fairies and fairy like, it is Carl, Bradford. Uh, it doesn't have the same weight and same existence as a fairy. At its most like noble, it is a wild lord of the forest and shares a lot with wood woses and other such beasts. At its worst is something like the Missouri skunk ape, which smells like death and then it beats you to death and eats you, kind of sometimes. Sometimes it's just mean. Better have your fire out because fire bad. And it doesn't seem to have the same supernatural qualities. There are reports in American forests of invisible movers, things moving about invisible to the native eye that causes all birds to cease their chirping, which has had some video evidence to it in one or two places. But it could just be a natural phenomenon. Like, it's just something moving across the screen. Like, not even something moving across the stream. It's just the birds getting quiet. Sometimes they do that. You don't know why. Sometimes it's just a bobcat.
oh,
Um,
by the way, I found the Chesterton article, actually, it is called, if you Google Chesterton on psychics, you'll find his article,
Give it to me on Discord.
Skepticism and Spiritualism. Let me read.
Hold on.
Yeah,
Let's
finish what you're saying. I'll
right.
read when you're done. I'll read the little bit that I was looking for.
Absolutely. So I would say, with Sasquatch and the Jersey Devil and things like the Mothman and other such cryptids, or aliens or so on, they have a different genre than fairies. Fairies have a specific genre that you can sort of tell. There's a unearthliness about them. They're almost too light for air, more real than you think they should be, but quite unreal at the same time. Some of the stories that hit this best are things like Phantastes by George MacDonald, who C.S. Lewis said an excellent writer if you can separate him from his Christianity, or something to that effect. He was one of those guys who, unfortunately, believed that everyone gets to heaven eventually. Um,
Uh, you're referring to George MacDonald, you said?
yes.
Yeah, well, the thing is that you're absolutely right about that, but Lewis actually was a great, great admirer of George MacDonald.
Oh,
In fact, considered him
absolutely.
a mentor. And he's the Dante of or not the Dante, the Virgil of the Great Divorce.
Oh yeah. Like I'm not trying to over. Oh, sorry. Maybe I was a little too negative in what I said. He's a great writer, a truly great writer, and is
I think
directly responsible for a
about
lot
that,
of the
however.
things. Was that?
I do think you are right, and he is wrong about that. The heaven, everybody gets into heaven theory,
Oh yeah,
universalism.
yeah. Universalism is a heresy. It's always been a heresy. Protestants, even though we don't have the same language and definitions as Catholics, like, oh yeah, no, very few Protestants, by the numbers, believe in universalism. Um, Christians are superstitious,
The
yes.
evangelical side. So my experience with the evangelical side of Protestantism, and not to get too deeply into my past, but I've had quite a bit of it. Is that they're actually like stricter on their criteria than Catholics tend to be.
Mm-hmm.
With that said, like it's worth noting that this is all tendencies. Catholic law actually has a lot more like leeway to it than people realize. Uh, trying to put it a specific way. Evangelical, I think, in a weird way, I know this will sound almost like counterintuitive, but in a weird way, evangelical means something more specific than Catholic does in terms of at least this particular subject. Like
Yes.
they're Catholics going with like Hans von Balthasar, I believe, the theologian, who by the way, much like George, much like you could say with George MacDonald, I think was a legitimately holy man from what I understood of him. I'm not like too into his stuff, but he believed that universalism was in fact possible in theory. He did not, and he said we can't say for sure whether it was true or not. Technically, but he used to say that, like, technically, we can hope and pray that everybody makes it into heaven, but we cannot say for sure. David Bentley Hart, who is Orthodox, wrote a book on universalism that Edward Fesser had a few very pointed exchanges with him about. Uh, so Hans von Balthasar, I know that John Paul II was kind of a disciple of Hans von Balthasar, and I don't think, and both of them would hasten to say that you could not say that like everybody made it into heaven, but they would also, I think John Paul II would agree that you could pray that everybody could. However, from my experience with evangelicals, they would not say that.
Yes. We
Like
we
they
would
went,
not say that at all.
yeah, they went far enough. The one in one book I read, the evangelical author who was countering several different opinions on universalism and who can make it into heaven went so far as to like say he didn't address it directly, but a very obvious, I guess I don't know if problem is the right word, perhaps tension with his position is that his position would have made it that if you were too slow to grasp the truths of the Christian faith, like intellectually, literally retarded to grasp the truths of the Christian faith, then you would end up in hell. And he like kind of says in passing, yeah, I don't really see a way around it. You know, gonna
Yep.
have to deal. Like, and he also said like, also I would rather be, and I wrote like some sort of paper that was a response to it a while back, and I submitted it as an assignment. I didn't get a good grade on this paper. I'm still very salty about it. I am convinced that the reason I did not get a good grade was because that I was at least somewhat critical of this guy. And even my like, I was critical of him, but I didn't like think, disrespect him. I did respect. I forget. I wish I remembered the title of the book. I'm sure I could look it up if I really wanted to, but I'm not going to. Uh, I'm too lazy. Uh, yeah, it was interesting though, and he responded to some Catholic writers. It's a pretty complicated subject. Uh, Joseph Moore, who is a guy who's really just a guy. He's a guy whose blog I follow. He's very interesting, very smart. I recommend him. His blog is called Yard Sale of the Mind. Uh, you might see him pop up in comment sections on John C. Wright's blog. I'm literally looking at a comment of his on the blog right now. So there you go. But he had an article where he reviewed Pilgrim's Progress, and he said that Pilgrim's Progress was a very interesting book. It was and a good book to know Puritan thinking. But he pointed out, as a for example for you of what I'm talking about. He goes, now, what would a Catholic version of Pilgrim's Progress look like? They go, well, actually, it would probably look something like Dante's Inferno. He goes, but let's say we have a lesser author, somebody who is on the Bunyan level, right?
Hmm.
That was the author who wrote it in the same strict allegory style as Pilgrim's Progress. Well, what would that look like? And he said, well, you would probably have characters called sacraments, and you would have characters called saints, and you would have good priest and bad priest, and you'd have to deal with that. He goes, but I think the most pointed change would be the ending. So at the end of Pilgrim's Progress, Ignorance, who has traveled this whole way with our buddy Christian, gets to the gates of heaven, and he is a pompous fool. And he is told, you were told the whole time, and you ignored it, so now you're getting tossed into hell. And that's how the Pilgrim's Progress ends. He said, in the Catholic version of the ending, that is actually probably not how it would go. Ignorance would open the door to the same place that Christian made it, and he would realize how wrong he was, and he would recognize his folly, and he would turn away of his own choice. But then the angels would come out, and they would carry him to the mountain of purgatory, where he would need to climb the mountain, and by doing so, perhaps he could recognize all of the areas he got wrong, and so attain salvation. Now, I am not here to debate this. However, I do think that he is probably right, and that would be an interesting change. It's also kind of gets into like, the really hardcore evangelical Puritan influenced Protestant thinking versus the Catholic thinking. It was an interesting post. If I can find it, I'll actually put that there too. You might be interested in it too, because he also reviewed in that same post John C. Wright's Iron Chamber of Memory.
Ooh.
Uh, Megabuster Shepherd says, in terms of being too mentally underdeveloped to understand Christianity, my autistic brother did receive a blessing of absolution. Well, that is kind of my point. I don't mean start any fist fights, but such a thing is that sort of blessing is not in every Protestant denomination. I don't want to make a blanket term about all Protestants or even all evangelicals because they aren't one group.
You'd be
But they're,
surprised how much effort goes into teaching autistic kids the gospel and so on.
I'm sure.
Like my parents
In
literally
fact, I
got.
consider that one of the great benefits of. I think that that's something that the evangelicals do better than the Catholics. Even Edward Fesser pointed that out. He said, he Edward Fesser related a story where, and he is a Catholic, where an evangelical man like went up to him and asked him if he had read his Bible, and he was very polite to me, and I told him yes, but I was thinking to myself like, why did he do that? But I've never ever heard of a Catholic doing that, and he's right.
Yep.
That's one of the great errors of the Catholic Church.
And
Based priest today was on fire. He actually called out like the entire American church hierarchy as being too concerned with immigration, which was unbelievably ballsy. Uh, and extremely refreshing to hear.
Anyway, there's that sort of thing is very complicated answer. I do not believe that God would send to hell an autistic man who can't even say the name of Jesus Christ, provided that, it's one of those things where, if it was given and it was accepted, even if the words aren't right for it, it's fine. Like, there's an acceptance there that needs to happen that's more important than being able to articulate what's going on. Also, people overestimate the mental issues of autistic people when it comes to communication. Provided that an autistic person can communicate what they want and what they don't want, they can understand a very simple gospel. Especially if they've been very well cared for, which is not a guarantee. It's kind of like this. Protestants have to make a very hard choice about the problem of aborted children in America. Did God really allow 90 million souls to be sent to hell? And to me, who I am a very strict, you have to accept Christ. I accept that that there must be some special rule we are not told of for babies. Babies who cannot understand, cannot accept, cannot be taught, so on and so forth. But I am not willing to put any theological bones on it. And we're supposed to be talking about fairies, and we're way off topic. But
so we are. I can read the. Let me read the
hold on,
actual quote.
I haven't even set this up. So you gotta let me finish
Oh
it
my!
up, and then we'll get to it.
We got too off topic.
We got too
Go
off
ahead.
topic. So now we got to take it around. So it's like a lot of that stuff, when it comes to universalism, are there grades to it that we just don't need to know about? Anyone who can talk about the issue does not need universalism. Does not need to think about it. Does not need to worry about it. The babies dying in the womb or whatever does not need to be an issue, because you can talk about it. Therefore, it doesn't apply to you. But going back to fairies and stuff like that, I said that there's something back on point. It's okay. It's okay, Megabuster Shepherd. But this is a very complicated issue that we're both, I don't know if passionate about, but we both have thought about it because it is important. Like the salvation of the world, the people in it is an important topic for
Mm-hmm.
Christians to discuss and to think about. We have a lot of fun on here and we talk about what we want, but a lot of it I think of, okay, well, how can we turn this around to Christianity? How can we do this? How can we not separate ourselves from Christianity? I believe that Christianity suppresses superstitions that are not Christian. I believe it suppresses the ability and the actions of gods, fairies, demons, whatever you want to call them, depending on what genre they are. My pastor talked today about how he got some texts from a guy, an artist friend of his, musician, who was experiencing demonic activity because he had not quite sold his soul like some of the other guys. But he was up there. He was up there. He had sold his soul to something, and it was starting to infest him more and more. You know, what can you do about that? If the man was Christian, he wouldn't have these issues. If he reached out to the pastor because he could remember it, but even then, it's like it's still a spiritual war that he wasn't willing to give up and to give to Christ. Um, he was affected by these demons but it's I don't know. It's hard to kind of communicate it in so short a time. But with fairies, I believe that they are a sort of bridge to the spiritual world. The sort of like in between where things get incomprehensible. You get that quasi Lovecraft vibe where you don't really get what's going on, but you understand what's going on. And then you have things like representations. In Swan Knight's Son, the fairies war over whether it should be a cold and dark winter to cause suffering or whether it should be a long and hot summer to cause suffering. So on and so forth. Anyway, so that's the sort of context it is. There's a otherworldliness that is more real than real, has moral underpinnings that Anthony is about to describe in the article, and it creates something more
Mhm.
than what we might expect of the world we live in. Anyway, take it away, Anthony.
So Chesterton has a lot of different quotes on fairy, but the one I was referring to earlier, which was about his idea that his concepts of psychics, he just has an article where he says basically every time I see the media talking about psychics, I think they're idiots. Uh, And he says, in fact, the mere abstract rationality of this problem is very wrongly discussed. For instance, it is always considered ludicrous and a signal for a burst of laughter if the spiritualists say that a seance has been spoiled by the presence of a skeptic, or that an attitude of faith is necessary to encourage the psychic communications. But there is nothing at all unreasonable or unlikely about the idea that doubt might discourage and faith encourage spiritual communications, if there are any. The suggestion does not make spiritualism and abstract logic any more improbable. All that does is make it more difficult. There is nothing foolish or fantastic about the supposition that a dispassionate person acts as a deterrent to passionate truths only. Hold on. Blah, blah, blah. Oh, yeah, only it happens to make it much harder for any dispassionate person to find out what is true. There are 1,000 practical parallels. An impartial psychologist making love to each other. But studying the problem of human nature could, no doubt, learn a great deal from a man and woman making love to each other in his presence. Nonetheless, is unfortunately the fact that no man and woman make love to each other in the presence of an impartial psychologist. Students of physiology and surgery might learn something from a man suddenly stabbing another man, the platform, in a lecture theater, but no man would stab another man, the platform, in a lecture theater. Schoolmaster would learn much if the boys would be boys in his presence, but they never are boys in his presence. An educationalist studying infancy might make important discoveries if he heard things said by a baby when absolutely alone and at ease with his mother. It's quite obvious that the mere entrance of a great ugly educationalist, they are an ugly lot, would set the child screaming with terror. So, what Chesterton is trying to say there is that the idea that if you are doubtful or skeptical and this somehow messes with psychic abilities, like he considers to be a perfectly plausible supposition. Now, with that said, it is also true that anytime that we have tried to measure psychic powers, uh, they no, we've never really been able to discover anything concrete about it. But I don't think you would, because the very idea of measuring it, I think, kind of misses the point of what they are. It's
Yep.
also why I hold all of these shows and things with utter contempt. I not only disrespect them, I find them kind of vulgar and disgusting. I mean, to say nothing of like any shows that have like fake mediums or whatever, I actually consider that to be like lowest of the low, absolute vulture bottom feeders. Uh, what's his name? Super Eye Patch Wolf had his great video on psychics, and his video didn't tell me anything that I didn't know necessarily, but but as always with Eye Patch Wolf, it was a story well told and well laid out and quite interesting in its own right. And it did cement my opinion that, mediums especially are just vultures. They're truly awful people.
Oh yeah.
And there is a reason that communicating with the dead has been a taboo for literally all of human history. If you have somebody who claims that they could do it, there are two options here. One, they are lying. Two, you shouldn't be doing it anyway. By the way, this has been the traditional Catholic Church position on witches and witchcraft generally. Are witches actually using magic? Well, the eternal position of the church has been it doesn't actually matter either way. Because if they're not, they're lying, it's a sin.
Mm-hmm.
And if they are, well, for obvious reasons, hopefully, to a Christian, that is a sin. So it doesn't really make much of a difference on a practical level. I did have a teacher, a theology teacher, who once said that the Salem witchcraft trials only come across as absurd to us in retrospect because we do not believe in witches. I never knew quite what to make of that.
It's
Carl Phillips says, "Have you read God Hates Me, Diary of an Ex-Angel?" Has a segment on fairies. They're demons LARPing because they're in self-deceitful denial about their true nature. No, I have never heard of that book. That sounds at least somewhat plausible to me, however.
It does. In Pinkerton's Ghost, the lore is that fairies are nature spirits of sorts, meant for the care of the world and whatnot. But that demons and gods are more or less the same thing. It's just that demons are more, shall we say, wild or directed, whereas gods are like, Hades on his throne. Not necessarily. Um, how do I want to put it? Not necessarily a tempter, but certainly somebody on the evil side of things. Same with characters like Artemis and whatnot. Uh, yeah, the so we've established that fairies and demons and so on are moral creatures. Even if they're immoral, there's a moral element to them that matters. The idea of separating fairies from morality is kind of absurd, even as we assume that all demons are evil, and they are. Um, the the complexity comes from how do we as humans grounded in the physical with, shall we say, a thread to the spiritual rather than living wholly in the spiritual, how do we relate to this stuff? How do we interact with it? Well, I think the best way to interact with it is to transform it into fiction. There's a bunch of English people especially love these books about fairyland, elfland, in books like The Wishing Chair again, and Fantastes, as I mentioned before. Narnia is sort of a metaphorical version of it. Um, King of Elfland's Daughter, Lord Dunsany, and others have this certain desire for it, which I believe is English. Like Americans are practical Englishmen. At least that's the ideal version of them. Um, so we still have a certain amount of whimsy. That's why we have so many more folk tales than you would see in other countries. Partially because their folk tales are different or just morality lessons, but also, we just, there's something in it. You know what I mean? We don't have to make up cryptids, but we do. Every state has a cryptid, and I mentioned earlier the skunk ape. Well, every county in Ireland has a fairy mound. Every place in England has a hallowed moor or a haunted hill or any number of things. Old places have old things. Wilder places have wild things, and so on and so forth. And it creates this sort of ecosystem that goes on behind the scenes where we can't look at it. It's the reason why it's obvious that technology messes up in front of fairies. Well, it's not. It's too real. It's too mechanical. It's too it's like the electricity dissipates, right? Like the electricity, the
Mhm.
brain sparks can no longer function in the same way as they could in a wholly physical world. Jackalopes, yeah, absolutely. You ever seen a jackalope strip a man to the bone in 15 seconds? You'll not soon forget it. But uh, but
So,
hmm?
yeah, and incidentally, I've discovered that I found Diary of an Ex-Angel, and now I remember it. A Castalia House book that has arguably the worst cover I have ever seen.
What?
The title makes it look like an erotic romance,
Gross.
and I would avoid this book like the plague. I would literally go out of my way to not see it if I actually, like, if it were in a store. And it's apparently, according to the reviews, as not the cover is highly misleading, and that's not actually what the book is like at all.
Which is weird because like Castalia usually has decent covers. Like I'm looking at the Law Dog files. Like that's a fantastic little cover. Simple, but whatever.
So, as I read, this is a good example. The cover art of a commenter on the cover. The cover art is a different matter. Sizable chunk of readers pick books at least partly because of the cover, and that is wrong. 100% of readers who don't, unless they already know they're going to get it either way, the cover will impact what that if they pick up the book. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Anyway,
Yeah, absolutely.
and God, yeah, and God Hates Me is saddled with a cover guaranteed to appeal to a thread-thin demographic romance novel fans who fancy a bit of bodice-burning brimstone with their boy toys. But on the other hand, let me try to present this in a charitable light. One could say that David Schwimmer hitting the gym and repurposing himself as a hellbound Harlequin cover boy is what the university wags would call a bold, transgressive career move.
It's a bold move,
And
Cotton. Let's see if it pans out.
I hate that movie, but I quote that line all the time.
Oh, it's a great line to quote. Anyway, keep going.
No, that's all I have to say about the cover. It's just it has like absolutely nothing to do with the book, apparently, which is weird. Castalia House is very hit and miss with their cover. So A.M. Freeman says, "I want to know what you're talking about. I am referring to the book God Hates Me, The Diary of an Ex-Angel. It's like a satirical thing about an angel who was kicked out of heaven and he tries to explain why it wasn't his fault and he wants to make it back into God's good graces, which is a fine idea for a story, I think, like, if told with the appropriate humor and
Mm,
it's not long, whatever. But it is unfortunately saddled with the worst cover I've ever seen. I just linked it to you, Ben, so if you want to look at it yourself, you can.
I will. I
Uh,
will take a look at it.
There is a
Uh,
sequel, but the sequel only has 2 reviews. One of them is a 3-star review, and one is a 1-star review. Which, oof, the cover is equally bad.
that
I
makes.
don't know what Castalia House was thinking with the series.
Oh wow. Yeah. Yeah. Just. Ugh. That's unfortunate. Anyway, here you
It
guys go.
reminds
Share
me
the
a little
pain.
bit. So it reminds me a little bit of the cover of Jungle Jitters. I don't know if you've seen that, which is like 3 women who are in their underwear or in ripped clothing getting marched through the woods by gorillas. The difference is that if you actually read Jungle Jitters, which I had on the recommendation of J.D. Cohen, and it is quite a funny book, though it's very blue. If you actually read Jungle Jitters, what is going on the cover actually happens in the story. So it is, in fact, a good cover.
Right. Exactly.
I don't really understand what is going on with this cover. Like, like what would make you do this? I don't get it.
It's a cover
I
so
mean, I
worth
suppose
talking about. We're just stop what we're doing. Okay, look at this thing. Look at it.
it,
You also have to look at it. Everyone, click on the link, like, comment, and subscribe. Uh,
you know what's a great cover? God Robot.
it is. It's
A+
fantastic.
cover.
Uh, so back to fairies. Um,
So back to
back to
fairies.
fairies. And we're not talking about the cover guy. What? Uh, so Megabuster Shepard says
Nice.
fairies are creatures chaos, cameras and photography of the world of man, thus order. So the twain should never meet. You see, it's like this, like all the order versus chaos. Like I finally decided what like it's like one of those things where you just have to figure out the rhetoric of it, because some edgy teen who's played too much Kingdom Hearts will be like, darkness is the opposite of light, and you want to slap this person and you want to slap them hard and many times, but you're not allowed to slap an 11-year-old. So I mean, but uh but it's really Cordell Mitchell says
Kingdom
that's some
Hearts was
good
never
cancer.
that good.
It was fine. It just lasted too long between sequels, and all the weird side stuff is A.M. Freeman says, "I wish I hadn't seen that." It's like, ha,
Cordell Mitchell says some good cancer.
yep. So it's like the answer is though. Listen, darkness is just the absence of light. Darkness is literally nothing. What's chaos? Well, like you could say that chaos is just confusion and all this random stuff, but in reality, chaos is just nothing. Like it's just nothing. Like sure, it's a nothing that you can hold in your hand, but like something that's just this weird formless mass doesn't exist. Like when people talk about like the weird, sea that God's, the spirit what's the word in Genesis? World was formless without void. There we go. or world was formless and void, or I can't remember it offhand. Whatever. Uh, but it's like that's not important, you know. It wasn't anything until God made it so. So like having that sort of thing, like I believe that the fairies are something. I believe that they're not chaos or anything like that. I believe that they actually have very strict rules that they follow. One of the things that Vox and Bowen Benjamin and others will talk about is that evil will tell you what it's doing. I have a friend who is not a Christian at all. And in fact, he's kind of a tempter to me. He's like, oh, but what about these hedonistic delights? And I'm like, I hate you, Renato, but yeah, let's have some hedonistic delights. You know, you are actually an interesting person to talk to. You know, it's among my friend group. Like he and I can chat about things that isn't just, you know, the game we're playing or whatever. And so it's like I stick around with him. But he's not going to be a Christian just because, you know, he and I have conversations about these things. You know, he's tempting me with these things, but it doesn't, how do I want to put it? Like, it doesn't have the same effect that he thinks it is. It's a joke to him to say, oh, let's do this and smoke cigars in a cigar lounge. And it's like, that's a temptation. Is it really a temptation? No. But it's, I've lost track of my point because I thought about Renato and I'm like, I kind of want to see him again. Just relax, be tempted, talk about things. Oh yeah, fairies, uh, lords of air and darkness. Uh, I think that they've got rules that whatever temptations they give out, like my friend Renato, they have to talk about them. And he says that people will tell you who they are. I believe that's true. I believe that fairies have specific rules that they have to mention before it. A lot of the time, you know, when you hear these fairy stories, the fairies come to the man in a dream, or he meets a short gentleman on the road, and he says, oh, don't, you know, Faith and Begora, do not dig under the hill in your lot, or else a misfortune will come upon ye, but you respect our boundaries, you'll have plenty of blessings. And of course, he either ignores the law, he ignores the rules, or he, you know, follows the rules. Um, and then it is as the fairies say, he's blessed, or he dies of a heart attack in the future. You know, usually it's at the height of their power. When you hear of if it's some sort of Irish magnate dying, you'd be surprised how many guys just die in the height of their power after toiling over a fairy mound. Um, you know, it's stuff like that. Like a lot of the stuff we're seeing today has been telegraphed really hard. Uh, you know, like sure, the Georgia Guidestones are a big one, but you know, they believe like, and Vox they pointed this one out is that if they tell you what they're doing, you not disagreeing with them, as in, like, let's say that you hear about the Georgia Guidestones but never actually read them. Well, you're still consenting to their evil. You know, the fairies are a similar way. They tell you what the rules are, but if you forget them or ignore them, that's no skin off their back. They're still in the right with whatever they do to you.
So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm just looking through the comments and we get the cover is very silly, the book is excellent. I can certainly believe that. I read in the book of classic Irish fairy tales that one popular belief is that the Fae are fallen angels who fought for neither side in the war in heaven. That's a cool idea. Seems more fictional than likely.
The problem is that obedience to God is a pure binary. So, like, um, yeah, you know, like what you can't really, you can't really, how do I want to put it? Yeah, it's a binary. Like, you can't be clever with it. And I feel like that's a clever clogs kind of thing. But I could see why some people would say it. Like, I prefer like the nature spirit thing just because it gives them something to do. That's not just like some weird spiritual thing that's neither side, but really it's pro Satan, if anything. You know, Anthony? Anthony, are you there? Hello? Anthony. Huh? Anthony might be just gone. Yeah, so it doesn't really work for me. Do I do I randomly like run away and scream and hide if
I just disconnected and reconnected. Did that work?
yeah, see, oh, we can hear you again. Like I
Yay.
don't disagree with it when I read it. I just don't feel like it's as compelling as some other things because
Well,
they're
yeah.
still on the side of evil.
She says Shashi used that idea. I think it's fine fictionally.
Yeah, it's fine fictionally.
Yeah. It's
You
a
know.
it's a clever enough fictional idea. See, the actual problem comes from angelology, because as Thomas Aquinas would quite correctly tell you, angels' wills are set because they come in a place with no time, meaning
Hmm.
that the first choice that they make is the choice that they're locked into.
I don't know if I'd go all that way. But then again, it's I'm not in their shoes, so.
Well, this is one of those things that is like incredibly difficult for us to grasp because we are in a world with time.
Hmm.
Grasping what it would be like to have to be in a timeless world and to have yeah, it's just something I think that people can't really it's very, very difficult for people to wrap their heads around it. One thing, it's sort of like talking about the Trinity. One thing that people will mention, like almost the problem with talking about the Trinity, is that there will be moments where you'll get it for like a second. You'll flash, it'll click in your head, but then you'll think back on it and try to explain it, and you really can't.
Yep.
And I think that's the best that we as humans can get with the Trinity. You could get flashes of understanding, moments where it clicks for you, but no more than that.
Yep.
Uh, Speak of the Fae, and the Gremlins will appear and cut your internet.
You weren't flattering enough, Anthony. You see,
That's true.
you
Uh,
disrespected the fair folk.
I really did. Hold on. I've been looking for G.K. Chesterton's quote on the physics of fairyland is moral. Let me try the physics of fairy tale. Fairyland is moral. Chesterton. Because I'm pretty sure that is a G.K. Chesterton quote. No, it's hard for me to find. It's hard for me to find this one, unfortunately.
Sure. Let's
I
see
mean,
here.
he has his famous comment on the reason that fairy tales are important, and this is, by the way, a paraphrase of the full quote. But the reason that fairy tales are important is because they do not teach you that there are dragons, but that dragons can be beaten.
Mm,
Which, by the way, I am not as clever as Chesterton is. I am actually not even sure if I agree with that.
that dragons
Uh,
can be beaten.
no, that's not what I mean. I mean, I'm not sure if that was actually meant to be the purpose of fairy tales.
Ah,
Uh, it sounds clever, and I get what he's going for there, but I wonder if that might just be a case of we believe it because Chesterton sounds clever.
I mean, well, this is not the worst reason you could possibly have. Um,
I mean, this, by the way, is coming from somebody who has said to you in conversation that I think that Chesterton was literally the greatest essayist of the 20th century. So take any quote unquote criticism with a grain of salt.
right.
Yeah. Uh, However, he did have a comment. I'm pretty sure this was what he said. And Aaron VT says, I think the Fairyland essay is an orthodoxy. I'll see if I can find it. I appreciate that. I am pretty sure this was a Chesterton quote, but he said that the physics of Fairyland is moral. And if it was not him, whoever said it, I agree with them.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out it's just like Joe the plumber.
Right.
He said
G.K.
it one day in
Chesterton's plumber.
said it one day in casual conversation, and then it just kind of stuck.
And they're right. They really are. Because it's like, when you deal with things that are more physical than the physical world, that are like, I keep going back to this, but to me it's always been very real, and it's been much more real than it probably should be, thinking about it. But it's very important. Like, the idea that we can separate ourselves from the moral living of the world is kind of a foolishness. It's kind of strange. Like, like Coomer memes, right? These Coomer memes, they're something that people would say, oh, it doesn't really affect you, oh this, oh that, but really, it's a much deeper issue than people want to admit, and it's an effect of the spiritual world coming in and affecting our physical world. And I think that fairies are a similar sort of way. Like, it's there are things that are corruption of the good, the beautiful, the true, and so on. But then there's also things that are just weird fairy BS.
So, Megabuster Shepherd asks, will the Fae be judged at the end of time? Well, I tend to the opinion that the Fae are probably already damned. With that said, I do not know. So, I don't know. Luckily, it's not up to me.
Yep.
Uh,
Same.
it seems doubtful to me, but then again, I am not God, so yeah.
Assuming all the stuff is um, as we've described. There's a lot more to it than even we know. What's that one phrase? There's a lot more than is dreamed of in your philosophies, Horatio. It's that sort of thing.
Yes. Aaron VC says, Chapter 4, Ethics of Elfland. I think that's what you're looking for. Ooh, yes. Let me Google that.
Please.
Ethics of Elfland.
G.K. Chesterton is a big hole in what I've not read. Well, that I've read in Christian commentary and so on and so forth.
I need to read more of him, I think, is
Mm-hmm.
definitely true. Everybody recommends Orthodoxy, but it feels weird to me to read it without reading Heretics, and I started reading Heretics, but I got distracted. So, all right, yes. So here is the commentary. Uh, Fairyland is nothing but the sunny country of common sense. It's not Earth that judges heaven, but heaven that judges Earth. So for me, at least, it was not Earth that criticized Elfland, but Elfland that criticized the Earth. I knew the magic beanstalk before I had tasted the beans. I was sure of the man in the moon before I was certain of the moon. That's a weird comment. I don't understand that. Uh,
That
sorry,
his
Chesterton, you're confusing me.
that his childhood whimsy was to him more real than science.
Okay. So, this was at one with all popular tradition. Modern minor poets are naturalists and talk about the bush or the brook. But the singers of the old epics and fables were supernaturalists and talked about the gods of brook and bush. That's what modern means when they say that ancient blah blah blah. I thought that was it, but I can't. That's not what quite exactly what I was looking for. I mean, it's an interesting comment in itself, though. He's right.
One of the things I always liked about the Fairyland stories is that oftentimes they'll go for it. You can get whatever you wish. And then the kids are like, I want cake. And then it's like, yes, but if you eat too much cake, you get a bellyache. And they're like, okay. And then, like, they get a bellyache. And then the fairy grandmother's like, I told you. And it's like, oh. And it's like, but then they never use that, the ability to make infinite whatever they want or whatever to do anything with it. And I think that's part of it. Like, a good Fairyland story won't, like, devolve into some sort of, wish fulfillment or anything like that.
So, Megabuster Shepherd says, I've been meaning to pick it up, but I have a backlog to get through. So, currently, my backlog is I am trying to read through I am beta reading a story for one of the Pinkertons authors, in fact. Not you or Ken, obviously, but one of our guest authors asked if I would beta read a story, and I gotta get that done.
You do.
Yes. And after that, I am going to read Pirate Freedom by Gene Wolfe, because I have never read a Wolfe book that I genuinely really liked. The closest was Sorcerer's House, which I thought was okay. And then I learned afterward that I misunderstood the book. Uh, but Pirate Freedom looks cool. So, I don't know. Anyway, just a small comment on backlogs. As far as when Orthodoxy will get in there, it'll get there. Uh, talking about Hollow Knight, never played it, don't want to play it because I would probably find it annoyingly difficult since I'm bad at video games. But on the other hand, the Diamond and Pearl Pokemon remakes are out on Friday, and I am totally getting that.
Gross.
But Nintendo makes terrible business decisions.
Does it?
They're
Do they?
anti-consumer.
Are
I don't
they?
care. You want to know why I don't care? Because if you got Let's Go Pikachu, and of course I do, then you get a Mew, and I have wanted a Mew since Generation 1, so I'm getting it.
Good night, Chris. And it's okay. There's worse reasons to do anything.
Alright, so I'm saying this, by the way, as I dig through the essay looking for the quote that I was hoping to find. So I'm not totally ignoring it, but unfortunately it's a longish essay, so it's hard to find the quote. A.M. Freeman says I'm bad at video games, but Hollow Knight is so cute. It does look very nice. I'll give it that.
I view it as kind of like not a fairy tale, but kind of like a fairy tale, like fairy tale adjacent, because it's got all
Carl Philip
these.
Gabler says weeb. Is this seriously the moment that you're gonna pick on us for being weebs, and not the time that we spent an entire 4 hours ranking every anime we ever watched? Really? Pick your battles.
And we weren't done yet. Don't forget that.
Oh yeah, and we figured out later that we missed a few.
Yep.
Multiple.
So, multiple, many. Partially because I am 32 years old and I absorbed a lot of anime through osmosis with with my friends, but also because there's a lot of anime out there, a lot of anime that we watched, a lot of anime that's trash and deserves to be forgotten.
Although, surprisingly, I have not watched a ton of that trash. I'm looking forward to the D to F streams. But anyway, since I can't find the exact quote, I am going to go over the sentiment, because the sentiment is one that I agree with. Now, the sentiment goes something like this. Mega Buster Shepard said they had an entire stream dedicated to JoJo. An entire stream.
And
Multiple, and there will be more, because JoJo Season 6, or Part 6, Season 5 is coming out.
Yep. Part 6. And we're looking forward to it.
Looking forward to the future stream, where it's all about how Reinhardt did nothing wrong and the Free Planets Alliance deserved to be conquered.
We've had that
Isn't
stream.
that the common wisdom?
Haven't we had that stream? We must have had that stream.
No, I don't think we've had it as a full stream. It just comes up in every discussion we have that's not about a specific anime. If it is about anime, and then we must remind everybody
that Reinhardt did nothing wrong. Watch JoJo.
Yes, that Reinhard von Lohengram did nothing wrong. So here's the ethics of Elfland point, or the physics. This is a quote that I've heard attributed to Chesterton. I cannot find it, unfortunately, so it might not have been him. But whoever came up with it, I agree with you. The physics of Fairyland are moral, and what that means is this: in Fairyland, you can fly. Maybe you could fly. Maybe you could grow super large. Maybe you could grow super tiny. Defy the laws of physics. All sorts of things, but you can't lie.
Yep.
And if you give your true name away, then you're trapped forever. If you eat the food of the fairy world, you're trapped forever. If you are impolite or you are morally or you do something morally wrong, even if minor, then you have forfeited whatever. So honestly, one of the best examples of this, and one of the reasons that I think Spirited Away, going to throw that out there now.
Anime, weeb.
Yes, one of the reasons that Spirited Away is one of the three masterpieces of Miyazaki is that he absolutely nails this aspect of fairyland. The physics of fairyland are moral, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here at the beginning of the movie, why are they trapped in the fairy world? Well, her parents eat the food of the fairies,
Yep.
right? So number one, we get that. Uh, and Shihiro does not leave in time. So number two, she's overstayed their hospitality is another way of putting that. She has to get a job to avoid, and she has to give up her name, but she needs to write down her name so that she has a recording of it so that she could look at it later. And yet there are dragons and there are river spirits and there are all sorts of things that break the laws of physics as we know it. Megabuster Shepherd says Spirited Away is the best he made. I have had the opinion for a while now, and I've intended to make a video series on this, and I keep getting distracted, that Hayao Miyazaki has never really made a poor movie, but he has three masterpieces, and those three masterpieces are Princess Mononoke, Spirited Away, and The Wind Rises. So I do think that Spirited Away is one of those movies that stands up with the greatest films ever created. That's one of the reasons, though. And Spirited Away deserved the accolades it got. Yes, it did.
Yep.
100%. 100% it did. It is one of the most ludicrous snubs in the history of cinema that Frozen somehow won Best Animated Picture over The Wind Rises. That's so utterly absurd since Frozen is a terrible film and The Wind Rises is one of the greatest films ever made. But whatever. We're entirely off topic. The point is, Spirited Away is an absolutely superb example of everything that we're talking about, all the way up to the end of the movie. The end of the movie is she needs to spot which pigs are her parents, right? Well,
Yep.
how is this a moral test? It actually is a moral test. It's a moral test in the sense of it is testing Shihiro's love for her parents. Now, you might say that the fairies are reacting in ways that are far harsher than we would in the human world, and that's true, but that's because you need to think of it as the fairies are acting as if the morality is the physics, just like we test ways that we can, say fly planes, even though we have gravity. They test ways in which they could lie without actually breaking the rules of not lying, right?
Yep.
when you when you look at it in that way, it all kind of clicks and makes more sense. Part of it too is that fairies are always looking for ways around these loopholes because they are literally trapped by them.
Mm-hmm.
So, just like we are literally trapped by the physical laws, can we transcend them? Yes and no. We can't exactly transcend them, but we can work with them to creatively overcome the limitations that would otherwise be placed on us, and Fairyland works the same way. Can a fairy lie? No, but they can word things in such a way that even though they said something that's technically true, you don't realize that that's what they're saying. Something like that.
There's also, like, it's kind of like how the Japanese have a lot of ways of saying no. If they don't give you an explicit yes, as in a plain yes, without, without consideration, then it's a yes.
Right,
Otherwise, it's a
exactly.
no. It's always going to be a no. Like it's a similar way. Like I don't like it's like one of those things. I'm best friends, I don't know if it's whatever, but I was best friends with an Asian guy. I don't trust him. I don't
I
trust
don't
anyone.
trust
I don't
Asians.
trust Asians. I've been friends with them for years. Like and it's not even like a joke to me anymore. It's like, yeah, absolutely. And it cost me money. It's done this and it's caused me all sorts of issues.
Oh man,
And it's
another
it's
cool
like
quote to be used in the trial one day.
I know, right? It's like it's like me and the in chains and the thing, and it's like so now we have to look over all his memes and everything he's ever said, and just me and the boys laughing. Uh, anyway, um, Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff. Only got 6 viewers. Oh boy, no, it's not a record. It's weird the
Actually,
way
that's more that is a lot though for these live streams
it is.
live. But
Face
anyway,
culture is a hell of a drug, absolutely.
yeah,
But
Megabuster Shepard redacted his message, but he wanted to know if he could be on the Miyazaki live stream. I'm actually amazed. I would have assumed that we would have done a Miyazaki live stream at one point, but now that I think about it, I don't think we did.
we
That
haven't
seems
had a
wrong.
pure Miyazaki live stream.
Yeah, that seems wrong. I feel I feel like we probably should have at some point.
Right.
Maybe we're waiting for Miyazaki to finish his final movie. He's probably almost halfway there at this point.
You know that his final movie will be Beyond the Grave.
Somebody mentioned, I think one of the animators at Ghibli mentioned in what was, I think, a very dry and telling quote, "If he dies before it's done, then you know it will be considered a masterpiece," which sort of indicates what they think of Miyazaki over there at Studio Ghibli.
Right. And anyway, there's
So,
yeah.
so this is the last, yeah, this is the last comment I'll make on it because I know it's off topic, but like people have tried to argue hard with me about Miyazaki because he is admittedly loved by SJWs. Uh, you can speculate away on why that is. However, and like I've had conversations with like right wingers who think that I'm like a shill for Miyazaki, and one of the things that they tried to do, this was back when I had a Twitter because I was an idiot. Obviously, I no longer have one of those. Get off Twitter, kids.
No.
Anyway, uh, and yeah, I have a Facebook, so what am I even talking about? But anyway, which is actually worse. But anyway, so one of the conversations on there, they were like trying to argue with me, like, did you know he's actually a terrible person? And I'm like, and like I was saying to them, why are you telling me this? Why do you think I care? I don't care. Like, so that like, did you know like he treated his son like shit? Like, I think they expected me to react like an SJW and like lose my shit or something. And they kept trying to fish for me to, I don't know, blow up at them. And I was like, yeah, Sam's it's pretty shitty what he did to his son. Uh, why are you telling me this?
Right.
Like, I.
But even then, like what he did to his son was perfectly legitimate for
Okay, so
like
his son was
it's
given. Here's what actually happened there. His son, and I guess we could save the full story for the I don't know, for the Miyazaki stream that apparently is eventually coming. But what he actually did to his son was that Toshio Suzuki, against Miyazaki's wishes, decided to make his son a director. His son did not have any actual experience with animation. He had experience with art, but not animation, and Miyazaki did not think he was ready. Miyazaki was extremely annoyed that Toshio Suzuki had done this against elder Miyazaki's wishes, and said as much. So when his son goes, no, I'm going to take the movie anyway. A movie, by the way, that Hayao Miyazaki had wanted to make, Tales from Earthsea, and that Ursula Le Guin thought he would make. Uh, he said, okay, fine. You know what? If you want to make the movie, make the damn movie. And he refused to help him with it. And then when the movie came out, it was garbage. And it was. It was not a good movie. Even the most passionate defenses of it I have never seen get above. I didn't think it was that bad, which tells you that it must really be pretty bad.
I didn't read a second gave it time.
So so his son made a crap movie because he wasn't actually ready to make a movie. Now, does that mean that Hayao Miyazaki shouldn't have helped him? Well, no. I mean, like, it's not really his son's fault. He was made the offer, but I could see why he was mad about it. And, people want to make a huge deal out of this, but he did help his son in his next film. It was From Up on Poppy Hill.
Yep.
Hayao wrote the script, directed it, and it won the Japanese equivalent of the Academy Award. People still want to make this a thing. I feel like that we should kind of leave it to them. Like, they apparently made up.
Yep.
Yeah. It's no longer our business. Like, Sure, I guess it was worth commenting on at the time because Miyazaki was public. Both Miyazakis, especially Hayao, were public about their annoyance. But since they've made up, I don't see why people keep dragging it up.
Right. At a certain point, like there's a difference between like a professional squabble and a deep abusive relationship. And I've always thought that like the issue with that movie was always more of an artistic squabble than Miyazaki being abusive. Like it's like, okay, son, you know.
There's levels here too. Like
Yep.
abusive is a hell of a thing to say, and you should be very careful when you make a comment like that.
Mhm.
I mean, as far as I know, Goro Miyazaki has never accused Hayao Miyazaki of being abusive.
Yep.
So, like was he a jerk? Should he have done what he did? Well, probably not, but at the same time, it's like they've apparently gotten over it. So,
Yep.
why are we still talking about it?
Yep. Like I don't it's like, it doesn't matter anymore. Like it's of the past more than anything else.
Yeah, I will say this. Megabuster Shepherd says it's not our family. Well, on one hand, I that. On the other hand, Hayao Miyazaki at the time made it public.
Mm.
So it's not that I think it was never worth commenting on. I think it was, but I also think that it ended. Like, you know,
Mhm.
they they clearly made up. And not only did they make up, they actually made a great movie. I mean, I haven't seen all of From Up on Poppy Hill. The little bits I saw made me think it was like an inferior Whisper of the Heart, but it has its fans. So,
Yep.
whatever. Uh, who has a very interesting take on Fairy World? Since I mentioned him earlier, Gene Wolfe,
Oh, what's that?
the author Gene Wolfe.
Yes, I know. I mean, what's his opinion?
Not his exact opinion per se, but have you ever actually read any Wolfe?
No. I think I've read part
Uh,
of one of his future world where everything's built on top of everything else forever. Um, or maybe that was Jack Vance.
ooh. I will say this: I've always been on the record as I've never been that big of a fan of Gene Wolfe, but he has one short story. I can't remember the title of it, but it was about a woman who a single, probably slightly older woman who always was calling herself fat and clearly had low self-esteem, who was on a cruise ship, and she is, like she becomes attracted to a guy and they sort of flirt with each other, and at the beginning of the story, she is given a teddy bear, and the teddy bear is told that it is for her protection. And like the story ends with the guy who she was kind of flirting with earlier. At the end of the story, uh, stays in her room to rape her, and is like arms himself and goes to rape and tells her like, "All right, take off all your clothes." But then the bear gets up, grabs his gun, and points it at the dude's head, and the guy's like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa!" And the story ends pretty hilariously. The bear only speaks if you like pull a string on its back. So he goes, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! Hold on a moment here." And the girl goes, "Yeah, that's right. That's my protection bear." And it's like, and he goes, "And you know what? I think I'm gonna leave what happens up to him next. So, how about we pull on the string and hear what he says?" And she pulls the string on the bear, and the last word of the story is, "Would you like to close your eyes?"
Wow.
Uh, it's a pretty
Beautiful.
funny story. Yeah. I'm sure that there's probably a lot of thematic richness to it because it's Gene Wolfe and he is incapable of writing anything that doesn't have themes upon themes. But
Right.
the story was pretty funny.
Yeah, that does sound pretty funny in all the best ways. Uh,
Megabuster Shepherd says the internet is a series of tubes. Yes. Uh,
I'm of the
and we will
opinion
not.
that
Yes, and we will not elaborate.
yes. I'm of the opinion that the internet is certainly real life or real life enough adjacent. It's not more real than real life. It's considerably more fake, but it's real enough. Especially if people can be destroyed over what they say on it.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, I don't have Twitter, but I still have Facebook, so yeah, I can hardly talk. Since Facebook is, if anything, worse. But whatever.
Is it worse? Or maybe they're just the same. Remember, make fun of Zuckerberg for his terrible products. That
Yes.
nerd doesn't get to be free of ridicule.
So,
I'd take
the
his
Wizard
lunch
Knight,
money if
though.
I could.
Yes, I agree. But, so, the Wizard Knight, if you've ever seen or looked at the Wizard Knight, I did not like it. It was recommended to me, and I'll explain why. It's for the reason that everybody doesn't. I don't like any of Wolf's stuff really, even though I'm giving Pirate Freedom a shot. Uh, but The Wizard Knight was recommended to me as, oh, this is a very accessible Gene Wolfe book, and that's when you go, narrator. It was not a very accessible Gene Wolfe book. You know, so it's about a boy. Like they call it in the synopsis, a young man, which is strange because he is canonically a boy. He's like 12, I'm pretty sure. But he is transformed when he makes it into the fairy world into a grown man. And he takes the name Sir Abel of the High Heart, and he sets out on a quest to find a sword that will help him fulfill his ambition but become a true knight. All of this sounds pretty great in concept. Like, very classic. And I know that John C. Wright has said the genius of Wizard Knight is that it combines Christianity and Norse mythology into a coherent whole, which, as John put it, I would have said was impossible before, the book came out, but Gene Wolfe managed it,
Hmm.
and perhaps he did. My problem with Wizard Knight is that everything is extremely vague. This is, of course, the problem with Gene Wolfe all of the time. The problem that I have with Gene Wolfe is that he never tells you what's going on. So Abel of the High Heart writes like a 12-year-old who is not a particularly good writer, which is perfectly realistic, but also makes it read like I'm reading the vague ramblings of somebody who doesn't really grasp everything that's happening, and it doesn't feel like a person. Like, it's so strange.
Anthony hates kids, confirmed.
Uh, yeah.
That's the appropriate answer. Yeah, absolutely.
So, anyway, also, Mega Buster Shepherd says fair, but people should learn to touch grass once in a while. I
Eh,
mean,
that's a that's
who
a
needs it?
that's a.
Stay in the pod, eat the bugs.
I view that as a liberal canard, though. I am unimpressed. It's like, yeah, touch grass. Okay, you know, most grass can be smoked for a pleasant high. I don't know. It's all I got.
most grass can most grass can be smoked for a pleasant high.
What do you
That's
want?
actually pretty funny. I
Okay.
am curious though about like how would you Christianize Norse mythology? Norse mythology seems so anti-Christian. I mean, I know that the Christians of the time Christianized it by just changing it. They just changed the ending.
Okay.
Like I know at the time, there were some hints of like, and then Ragnarok actually, and we ended up with a whole new world afterward that was even better, a new heaven and a new earth, and that was the Christianization. But that wasn't actually the myths. They just added that in there because it was completely broken. So I am curious as to how you would Christianize Norse mythology. Unfortunately, despite the fact that I probably read about half of Wizard, uh, I just read A.M. Freeman's comment. I'll read it out in a moment. Uh, even though I read the first half of the first book in the two-book series, Wizard, I could not tell you how he Christianized Norse mythology, because none of it stuck in my head.
You know,
Except for the fact I couldn't really understand what was going on. A.M. Freeman says, touch ass equals virgin. Touch grass equals Chad. That was pretty funny. Yeah, as far as, like, the physics of fairy lingo, it's something that is really interesting to handle in Pinkerton's Ghosts. Especially because we are, yeah, and so St. Christopher slew the ice giants. Yep. So Ragnarok was happening, and then the Saints came in and just blew everybody up and said, right, we're in charge now.
I love it. It's like the fairies are trying to take over America, and Jonathan Edwards said no. And then he started beating Oberon to death with a Bible. Except not
That's now canon.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's, by the way, it's now Pinkerton canon that Jonathan Edwards went to war with
Oberon.
Yeah, with Oberon and won.
Yeah, exactly. Sinners in the
In
hand of a
one-on-one,
wrathful
they
God.
engaged in one-on-one. Jonathan Edwards won. This is now part of the Pinkerton's Ghost canon.
After I'm done with you, you will be sinners in the hands of an angry God.
You're hanging over on a thread like a spider. It's time to snap that thread.
It's like you're. I love it.
Yo, I am not a Puritan, and I think Jonathan Edwards would be considered a Puritan, right?
I can't remember actually.
I don't know. Whatever the hell Jonathan Edwards was, I am not he. However, I cannot deny that the "sinners in the hands of an angry God" speech is super friggin' metal.
Puritan. Oh yeah, absolutely. Like it's a. Oh my goodness! It is a sermon. It is a sermon. Oh, but
It's such a metal speech. I can completely understand like how it had that impact on people, especially when you read the accounts of him reading it and like get up and read the entire thing basically in a monotone. So, which honestly I actually do think increases the impact of it. Just imagine some dude completely dead-eyed, like totally serious, going, "You are like a spider hanging on a thread." And that thread is your salvation, and the slightest breath of air will send you tumbling into the fires of hell. Does not slow down, does not, like, change his inflection.
right, you're just forced to listen to it, and it's terrifying.
Mega Buster Shepard says Thor saves Christmas. No, Thor is one of the people who's defeated. You misunderstand. I'm saying that they're having their war, and then the Saints come in and just wipe everybody out and go, right, we're in charge now.
Yep. Look at me. Look at me. I'm the chief god now.
No, Saint Nicholas comes in to Thor and goes, "Hey, look at me, look at me. Winter is mine now."
I slapped Arius, I'll slap the crap out of you.
Oh man, these are all things, by the way, that I might end up writing one day now, just like a satirical thing.
Right. Like Jonathan Edwards
won't write
dueling
this
Oberon for the soul of America. Absolutely, it's going to happen. But the rest of it,
I won't read any of this seriously. Yeah, and like any of what we're talking about, I won't spend time seriously writing it. Though I do think that you could make a serious story out of like the Christians overcoming the Norse gods if you really
Yep.
wanted to. I would not tell it. I would tell it as a joke.
Oh yeah. There's
But
certain
I wouldn't make it
gravitas that you
entirely
have to have.
comical. Mm-hmm. So Solomon Kane turned the full glory of God on the Fae and their thralls. Each gunshot was like the roar of heaven.
Absolutely. It's like Michael the Archangel comes down, gives Solomon Kane a brace of pistols, and he goes, "These are gold. This is gaudy. Give me cold iron." Absolutely. Down. We're down with that.
Amazing. Yeah, as we get into the Pinkerton story, so one thing that you're going to discover soon is that we're starting to get more and more involved in the fairy world in Pinkerton's Ghosts slowly. And I
Yep.
don't mean like I wouldn't say as a necessarily like that the story is going in that direction. I'm trying to figure out how best to describe it because
We're using it more.
Yeah, exactly.
And they've
But
always
we're
been
using
there.
it more. It has always been there, yes. But yeah, Pinkerton's Ghost being an American story, as you pointed out, America tends to have more to do with cryptids. However, we're introducing uh, some European influences into the story, like Violet, for example.
Yep.
Uh, Violet being Irish makes some sense, and Morgana being from Europe, and Morgana and Mordred,
Yep.
both being from Britain. So we were having all of these European influences dropping in here. So we're starting to incorporate more of this into the story, and it's an interesting balance. So the physics of fairyland are moral is how I always think of these stories, right? For example,
Yeah.
there is a small scene in Forest of Fear where Sean is talking to a pixie, and I can't remember if I called him a pixie in the story, but he was effectively a pixie,
Right.
right? And I imply that he has some minor magical powers and possibly more than people even realize. But Sean gets information out of him by offering him candy. However, in the scene, I made sure that he makes the offer to Sean that if Sean promises him his newborn baby, that he'll be able to solve the problem immediately. And like it's worth noting that that's one of the things I'm talking about, like with the physics of fairyland, that would be absolutely true. Like he could do something that would be physically impossible because they made a large enough moral bargain.
Yep.
You know, Sean wants to overtake, vampires, Morgana, whatever. Well, then he needs to give up something equivalently large in return. And if he does that, he will get that power.
Yep.
That's part of the point of the physics of fairyland. Now, Sean does not promise his firstborn son because he's not an idiot. Uh, and also, Sean is a moral person. On the other hand, I'm wondering if they would make that deal with somebody who figured that they would never have children. I can imagine it being like a folklore story. Somebody makes that deal assuming they'll never have children, but then they have a son and they need to give it up. Actually, something similar to that really does happen in the Arthurian myths or the Arthurian
Yep.
legends.
It
Uh,
did sound familiar to me. I just can't remember the fairy tale.
yeah, Uther. Uther has a child with Igraine, I think. Uh,
Yes.
he makes a deal with Merlin. So Merlin, you need to remember, is in the original Arthurian legends. I should say. I keep saying myths, which isn't quite right. In the original Arthurian legends,
The true history of England.
yes, Merlin is kind of part of the fairy world himself, or at least on the edge of it. C.S. Lewis had a great interpretation of the character, where he made it where like he was using the closest thing to permitted magic, and even then, it wasn't really permitted, and you should probably be not using it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great interpretation of Merlin, but it's worth thinking of Merlin as almost a fairy himself, right?
Right.
So he makes a deal with Uther. Uther wants to sleep with Igraine. He will make sure that Uther looks like Igraine's husband so they can sleep with each other. Then later, when Igraine's real husband actually does die and Uther marries her, uh, her firstborn child is actually Uther's firstborn child, and Merlin can collect him because that was the deal. So that's actually how the Arthurian myths or the Arthurian legend goes. At least the classical version that became popular after La Morte Arthur. Uh, Stephen Lawhead, in his interpretation of the story, had, I thought, an interesting twist on it that involved Igraine. He takes the child from Uther because Uther wanted to kill the child because he believed that the child was going to grow into somebody who could eventually challenge his throne. And Merlin goes in and convinces Uther to give him up.
Huh.
So that was an interesting twist on the story, I thought. Stephen Lawhead's Pendragon Cycle is fantastic, by the way. Highly, highly recommended. Uh, that was an interesting twist on the story, but the point is the whole, trade that whole idea of trades and agreements and things like that That's the sort of ironclad logic of the fairy world, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That's why monkey's paw stories are so common when you have wishes, right?
Yep.
The reason that they're so common is that you literally can't avoid them. Human beings simply do not have the capacity to understand the full context of the things that we wish for. That's the whole point of wish granting stories, right?
Yep.
But so there's always going to be, in a properly told wish granting story, a balance. You're never going to just get what you ask for and there are no complications.
You got what you wanted, but did you want what you get? From the Princess and the Frog.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I
So
don't
the
remember
ending.
that
So
line.
the ending of the I've got friends on the other side. He's got friends on the other
Oh, yeah.
side. It ends with
Oh, now I remember the line.
yeah. It
Yes.
ends with boom, 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 and then it builds up, and he's being transformed into the frog because Mr.
Yeah, and
Facilier.
then he go, you got what you wanted, but did you want what you got? But
Wait, no,
by the way, you want
yeah,
something like that.
and of course, just because this ties in, Mr. Facilier completely telegraphed what he was going to do to the both of them. It is on the cards. It's just not what he implied it. Like he implied, freedom takes green, and it shows a picture of the prince strumming a guitar on some lily pads. And it's actually like,
Hmm.
even though it's kind of killed hand drawn animation for Disney for quite some time, it was amazingly well done.
So, The Princess and the Frog, I don't want to discuss the whole movie because I think that the movie as a whole is pretty flawed. For one thing, I think it's ironic that Tiana is portrayed as like the hardworking princess when she in fact probably does actually less than a lot of princesses do to earn her happy ending, weirdly enough, but that's another story. Uh Facilier was fantastic. Perfect.
Oh, absolutely.
Honestly, the saving grace of the movie. I would probably have just straight up said the movie's not worth watching if it was not for Facilier, but Facilier is so good, he actually makes the movie. And Facilier is a perfect example of what we're talking about. So, Megabuster Shepherd says Boromir covets the ring and pays the price. Not exactly. Not how closer to that though is that if you use the ring, you lose your soul.
Mm-hmm.
So it is implied with the ring wraiths. Uh, that's a more exact analog of what I'm talking about. But Facilier is a great example of this. The friends on the other side can turn a man into a frog, but once you can't break a deal with them because if you do, then you're gonna get dragged into the underworld. The scene of Facilier getting dragged into the underworld is so good, it actually makes up for the absolute awful lameness of the immediately preceding line. So if what I'm referring to is, if you remember, it involved like they had to
Yes.
find an amulet or something, and she says something like, you and that slime" or whatever, and he says that's not slime, that's mucus, and she grabs the amulet and that line and breaks it with her tongue. That line was horrendous. I hated it. It killed baby Jesus, but
Oh,
no, it's
wrong.
awful. It's awful. But it is immediately followed by the friends from the other side showing up and dragging Facilier into hell. And that scene is so good, it actually makes up for the terribleness of that line. Which, let me tell you, that line is so bad, that's saying something.
Come on, friends. Come
It's
on. We could make another deal. Come on. And he just like, as he gets dragged away. It's
yeah,
great.
and they're going, "Are you ready?" Which perfectly done, perfect callback, perfect execution. Uh, all of its perfect reaction from Facilier. Uh, Absolutely dead on.
Yep.
Yeah, 10 of 10 scene. But in a movie that's probably like a 7 of 10 overall. Not totally worthless, but it should have been better. But yeah, its portrayal of the fairy world is excellent. Like you said, when he makes a deal with the prince, it's worth noting that he never actually lies to the prince. He makes a real deal with the
Mm-hmm.
prince. the deal is entirely legitimate, and Facilier, even though he can mislead him, even though he could speak elliptically, he
Yep.
needs to play by the rules,
Yep.
right? So, for example, he can make that deal, but there is a way out for the prince. To ask the question of, well, why did he even make that way out, misses the point of deals with the fairy world, right?
Yep.
Well, because it's like asking, why does gravity pull you down? Because that's how it works.
Right. For the elves, it's because they're sinful. For us, it's because it's gravity.
Yeah, exactly. So why do they offer him an out? Why do they offer him a way to break the curse? Because you need a way to break the curse. If you want to do that, that's the counterbalance. That's how you do it. Now, you could, much like we have airplanes to fly, you could find all sorts of ways to mislead people without actually lying. Just like we can find ways to overcome gravity without actually breaking the physical laws. But
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, you are still just trying to makeshift ways around it. So Facilier is portrayed as a master of this sort of double talk. Hence, in the song, "Friends on the Other Side," like you said, he's saying freedom takes green. He's showing him pretty much exactly what he is going to do to them immediately afterward, and
Yep.
and he cannot actually lie about it. He can only be vague about it, implicatory about it, but he cannot lie. John C. Wright has mentioned this, that he is convinced that the enemy is compelled to tell us exactly what their plans are going to be before they do them.
Yep.
So that's why you often see leftists accusing the right of things that they're doing all the time. And the reason that they go, well, why would they do that? Now they know we'll be on lookout for it. And John C. Wright says, I am convinced that evil is compelled to tell us what their plans are before they try to execute, and that is why they do it.
Yep. And also,
Um,
there's a very strong thing of it really doesn't matter um, whether or not we know it. If people are unwilling to defend it or fight it, it doesn't matter. Like, they can tell us all they want. The Georgia Guidestones, nobody's even tried to really destroy them. Though there is one thing that was probably a federale, not a real thing. And elves are the same way. Like one of the best parts about it is in an elfin story is when like the evil stepsisters try to get in on the elf's magic themselves and they're punished for it, whereas the good-hearted younger sister or whatever gets rewarded. And there's a whole bunch of things. Like one of the best ones of them actually have the sister going through the same things. In other words, the same tasks are laid out for the sister as they were for the younger sister. So the younger sister, helped out the old woman, did this, was pure of heart, didn't hurt, help the prince, and so on. So the older sister tries it for herself. Well, usually she fails at the first one because she's looking for an easy out. She isn't actually pure of heart. She refuses to help the old woman, and so the old woman curses her. Um, and then it's just failure all the way down. She never learns anything. Hmm. And it's these fairy stories doesn't really work in like a Pinkerton's ghost story in its direct one-to-one comparison, but it's still something to work on. Like the reason I have to be careful with how I like Jack Morrow does treat with fairies, but they view him as an entertaining hunting dog, not as somebody they actually treat with anything other than martial respect. They wouldn't go to Jack Morrow to ask his opinion on a human magic thing, but they do that for Jim. Sean can actually wheel and deal with fairies. Like it's you got to balance out what it is. But what you can do
well, I
is
think Wheel and Deal is a little bit. Sean is smart enough not to really try, but he will
right,
occasionally speak with them.
right, and it's like
Sean takes calculated risks,
right.
which is why, by the way, that I don't know. I was going to mention what's coming up in my upcoming story, Doppelganger, but maybe I shouldn't.
No, we'll leave it alone for now.
Maybe not. Yeah. However, there's something about the villain of Doppelganger. How about this? He is supposed to represent a little bit of like what if this person really did go fully into that world of deals and magic and,
Friends on the
sacrifice
other
and
side.
trades. Yeah, friends on the other side. And what would that turn him into? Sean could have done that. He has the skills, but he doesn't.
Right.
So you'll see when we get to my upcoming story, Doppelganger, what I am referring to.
If you're a member of our Subscribe Star, like several of our boys here, including Carl, including Cordell, and do we love you? Yes, we do. We love you. You guys are great. And it's like me, like squidging your cheeks. It's like, like I do Seals in the John C. Wright game. It's great. Uh, so I'm
Hey,
playing
I could get a paperback copy of Soldier of the Mist for only $809.67 off Amazon.
only 67 cents and $800. That's a great deal.
Or
Uh,
I could get it used for $978, one of the two. Or the hardcover used for $379.
A.M. Freeman has a great point. Deals with fairies are scary because the consequences are on you. Either because that was the deal and you didn't realize it correctly, or because you broke the rule. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's actually an excellent point. Consider again Spirited Away. How does Spirited Away end? Chihiro and her parents get to leave. But do any of the characters in the fairy world get their comeuppance? No.
nope.
None of them do. The evil witch who imprisons Chihiro and takes her name, she is allowed to just kind of continue with what she's doing. Now, there is a hint that Haku, because he got his name back, isn't going to be able to be pushed around so much anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But that's pretty much the extent of it.
Yep.
Like, she doesn't lose her position, she doesn't lose her respect, lose the battles, there's no comeuppance. Chihiro can't do anything.
Her like son has a little bit more will or whatever, but even then, like whatever they decide, to do, is just like it doesn't actually change the status quo nearly as much as you think it does. She's still going to be the master. All the servants are still going to be servants and so on. Just like if you best Oberon in a deal, Oberon is still king of the fairies, and you better have been respectful on your way out, even if you won a great
Right.
victory.
This is one of the reasons that Oberon makes deals.
Mm-hmm.
Because it doesn't cost him anything, because he is immortal.
Yep.
In fact, it goes back to things like Mr. Mixaplick in Superman. You have to convince him to say his name backwards. Now, I always found the concept of Mr. Mixaplick to be extremely stupid because, like, if he wouldn't say his name backwards.
Right, but
It's literally... I'm going to throw it out there. There has never been a good example of him tricking him into saying his name backwards. It's all been very dumb. Like, every example of it happening is stupid. But whatever, not the point. The point is, Mr. Mixaplick would make those deals because it doesn't really hurt him. If he wins, then Earth is doomed. If Superman wins, then he leaves and he could come back and try again later, which he does.
Yep.
It's a perfect example of what we're talking about. The fairies are amused at best by the humans, but they're never truly bothered by them. This, by the way, this whole dynamic is utilized to great effect in Green Knight Squire, where Gil is essentially a human who has ties to the fairy world, who is willing to speak to the fairies without the usual level of respect that the fairies tend to get from humans. Because he is a Christian, so the fairies don't scare him.
Yep. And it's important, and that's important.
Yeah,
he has a rank, he is a knight. He is worthy of the fight, and to demand certain lordships. He's also under the aegis of King Arthur, which is different than like just some random dude.
Well, yeah, and to tie this back into Christianity as well, Gil is in Green Knight Squire is a human, and the creatures of the spirit, which are demons, but also fairies, if fairies are real,
Mm-hmm.
look down on humans, have contempt for humans. They hate humans. Humans have messy bodies and they have physical functions that limit them. And yet, what they hate the most of all is that despite all of this, God is a human. God incarnated.
Yep.
God made. So that is the most hateful thing of all. It's the most shocking part of it. Lewis expresses this with excellent allegory in the Chronicles of Narnia, where they have the horse talking pompously about how obviously Aslan could never have come as a lion. Like a lion? Are you kidding me? A
Yep.
lowly animal? He would never be a lion. And then Aslan shows up.
Yep.
I want to say this happened in The Horse and His Boy. I could be wrong
Yes.
about the specific book.
And then
Uh,
Aslan's like, "Come on, try me. I'm a lion. Let's do it. Let's make sure you're satisfied that I am a
And
lion."
that's, of course, not exactly the same thing, but the concept allegorically is brilliant because it's very similar to the attitude demons have and the Gnostics as well. Like a
Mm-hmm.
human, are you saying that Jesus Christ would incarnate as a human? Humans who need to eat, who need to sleep, who need to use the bathroom, and God Himself is going to be a human? And you get the Chad yes in
Yes.
response.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes. And that is the thing that the fairies hate most of all. They are superior to us in just about every way. They are not limited by the physical world the way we are, but they can still influence it. So in many of the ways that are they would consider and that a lot of people would consider important and mighty, they are superior to humans. And yet, God Himself incarnated as a human, and
Mm-hmm.
that is the most unforgivable sin of all. We have an honor that is higher than the king of the fairies, the lowliest human.
Yep.
So Gil is correct to not be intimidated by the fairies. He explicitly justifies it essentially on those grounds. King Arthur is a servant of the high god, the true god, right? Much
Right.
like the high king Peter is the servant of Aslan. You know, in a similar sense, King Arthur, so his authority essentially comes from God indirectly.
Yep.
So he's saying, yeah, I'm a human, but I am not afraid of the fairies because God incarnated as a human. You know, I am human.
Yep.
And I am not going to be ashamed or intimidated by that fact. Now, with that said, Gil does several extremely stupid things in the course of the story. For example, Gil challenging the Green Knight was idiotic. Uh, it worked. I suppose it worked in the long run, but
Yes.
clearly he should not have done it, which
Right.
his mother pointed out. So there was a little bit of hubris there, but one of the reasons that Gil is able to, overcome that hubris is because he recognizes that he's the son of God.
Mm-hmm. And also,
Megabuster
he gets
Shepherd
his
says, "Oh yeah,
behind beat by a Sasquatch. So
he beats him again. He beats him later."
later.
But anyway, Megabuster Shepherd says, "I heard rumors about Aslan being called Tash. Wait, I think I saw a weird bird run by." Yeah, Tash and Aslan, like, aren't they actually the same thing?
Ugh, don't even
I've,
say
I've
that.
heard them called, I heard them called Tashland every now and then.
Blech. So like, even though it was a great conceit, man, that stuff drives me up a wall. Tash is one of the few times I've actually been scared reading a book. Like him running towards Narnia, just arms outstretched. The edition I had a fantastic illustration, like, and just him just like stalking through running. Oh my goodness, that like I'm a very
So,
hard scare, and that scene just terrified me because it means that it's just being given over to the devil.
so the last battle I have always considered to be arguably Lewis's greatest achievement, if not it's not my personal favorite of his books. However, it's hard to overstate, I think, how ambitious the last battle is.
Mm-hmm.
Lewis was essentially trying to condense the Book of Revelation into a children's story retold as an allegory, and like the sheer amount of depth in the last battle is insane. There is not a wasted word in that book.
Yep.
Everything has a purpose. It all like is pointing at something else. It all means something. It's just nuts, that book.
Yep.
And it also is the source of my favorite line in all of fiction. When the talking horses run out and the defenders of Narnia cheer, but then the dwarves turn on them and rain on them with arrows. And Eustace is shaking in rage and starts yelling and starts swearing at the horses. And Jill starts
At the
crying.
dwarves, I think.
Yes, and sorry, at the dwarves. And starts cursing at the dwarves. And Jill starts crying. And Tyrion, who is watching all of this, pauses and then he says, Eustace, don't swear. Knights don't swear. And then he looks at Jill and says, if you must weep, sweetheart, turn your face aside and see your tears wet not your bowstring. Ooh, I love that line.
Right.
Love, love, love that line.
It's
Every
also
time I read that line, I always feel like just a little bit ashamed of yourself.
it's such a good line though. Oh, but for me, it's always the farther up and farther in. Like I know it's a line of victory. Like it's not really part of the conflict anymore. You know, it's done. It's over. You know, you've won. You know, it's the storyline's just done. But it always hits me just right. Uh,
The Last Battle is one of the very, very few fictional portrayals of heaven that actually comes across as appealing.
yep.
Like the 5 people you meet in heaven, I've always found to be pretty twee, I guess is the word.
I've never even wanted to read it. It's like I don't care who I meet in
I've
heaven.
read plots.
I'm
I
gonna meet.
haven't actually read it myself. I was considering reading it and got sucked in, and I unfortunately, to my great shame, I suppose, got sucked in by the plot summary, and then I realized I spoiled the whole book.
yeah.
But sad, it's a sad story, using as a cautionary tale. But anyway, however, the story did strike me as kind of twee. With that said, in all fairness to Mitch Albom, perhaps his writing is so brilliant that it would have carried it through and made it seem very grounded. I can't confirm. But none, when I read it, it sounded like, and then everything will be magically fixed. And I'm not so sure that's exactly it. Like, Lewis seems to sort of get it. It's not so much that everything is fixed or that you overcome the mistakes that you made, or that it's what you thought you loved wasn't even what you loved. What you really loved was even better than that. And now
Mm-hmm.
it's time to show it to you. Yeah.
Yep.
Like, you thought you loved Narnia, but what you loved wasn't even Narnia. And this, of course, again goes back to everything comes from the Book of Revelation. Everything has a double meaning. Our final resting place, everybody says, is going to be heaven, but that is not right. There's going to be, at least not entirely, it's partially correct. Even heaven isn't the end. There's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. And it's
Yep.
going to be, and what we're seeing now, all of the good things in this world are all just, through a glass darkly, right?
Right.
There's what we're actually going to see is going to be, as Lewis put it, far greater than anything that we could have possibly imagined. Like, the good things that we see here are just reflections of that ultimate reality. So the
Yep.
idea of just going through your life and saying, and now you get to fix everything and now you're in the good place doesn't really work as well to me, though. I will be, in all fairness to Mitch Albom, I will say, if you are a fan of the book and can defend it, that's fine. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know if it's necessarily like theologically harmful or whatever. Like, for example,
Mm-hmm.
I literally I don't know enough. Like, for example, at one point he mentioned he was in like Vietnam and he cleaned, a little girl was like burned with napalm because of him, and he gets to like scrub the scars off of her back. Uh,
Oh.
I guess that's a nice, and I think that's the fifth person he meets, and I guess that's like a nice image, you know.
Yeah.
And I get that idea for heaven, but I don't know. Something about it strikes me as kind of twee, as opposed to the high beauty of what Lewis is offering.
Mm-hmm.
A.M. Freeman says, "I've seen the movie with Jaji because it's good at payload moments." Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'll try it one day. See if I'm being a little bit mean. I will say though that I've read a book by Mitch Albom. That book was Tuesdays with Maury, and that book is garbage.
But liberals love it, Anthony. Are you telling me that, they would I don't know.
No disrespect to Maury, he seemed like a very nice old man, but like that's pretty much it. Maury seemed like a very nice old man.
Yep. I
And credit to Mitch Albom. Mitch Albom really did, you know, he was secular. He might have been an atheist, but even if he wasn't, he was part of the entertainment complex, and then he converted to Christianity, and he wrote books and made movies and things. And you know what? I have nothing bad to say about the guy.
Oh, I didn't know
As
he
far,
converted.
yeah, that's what he was originally like. That's why he made the five people who meet in heaven.
Ah.
A.M. Freeman says the payload is ruined if you know what's coming. I think, yeah, I killed the movie for myself again. I'm a cautionary tale. Don't be like me, kids. And best part of all is I just ruined it for all of you too.
Thank you. It's just a whispered thank you.
CNN's Jim Acosta says Rittenhouse judge is acting like Archie Bunker. He sounds like he's watched too much Bill O'Reilly, Acosta says. Now that's a critique right there.
That's a take. That
That's a
is
hot take.
that's certainly a take.
Isn't that what that's the sort of insightful analysis that I've expected on this trial? The legal, when I want to hear, so legally, how did the judge do? Like, did he say anything? How did he do legally? Did he handle the trial well? Did he say anything incorrect? And then you go, I think he sounded like Archie Bunker.
He had proud to be an American as a ringtone. Eh,
He made a joke about supply train slowdowns, but he mentioned the word Asian. That's a word. Racist. I cannot. By the way, I cannot emphasize enough that that actually was it. That was the whole issue.
yeah, I know, dude.
Like
I was watching it. I heard
it's
it.
it's actually hilarious. Like I don't even know how. Like I can't even really make a joke about that because that's actually like what happened.
Yeah.
He made a joke about supply train slowdowns, but in the joke he used the word Asian, and then they jumped on that and called him racist.
Anthony, you're already killing our reach by mentioning the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. You're killing it. Now the
We're at the
algorithm
end of
won't
the
love us.
we're at the end of the stream, Ben.
Okay, fine. You're
We're
right.
well past the point the algorithm checks.
Fine. So like just to sort of summarize and finish up, it's kind of hard to explain something that isn't isn't pure physics. Like in our circles, there's a bit of too much realism going on, we'll say, and it basically kind of gimps our ability to talk about high spiritual things. Like any Christian who reads the Chronicles of Narnia, who has a bit of creativity, a bit of that spark, should be able to read farther up and farther in context, and sing. It's one of those things where, like, even if we try to describe the ideas, it's less than what it could be. And the same with fairies. Like, to describe fairies as we're doing here does not give them the justice of the feel of them. Of their strange majesty, of their rules, of their laws, of their evil and depravity. And they are depraved, especially compared to us, no matter how fair they are, and they are fairer than anything we could possibly imagine. It would not do them any good. especially when it's time to pay the cost. That's why things like the tithe to Tartarus is so important. They have to have somebody else be their scapegoat, or else they themselves are dragged to hell. If you believe that they're, a one third of demons, a one third of heaven who didn't fight on any side, well, all they chose was disobedience, except when it came time to fight, they're like, nah, and then left, when they were kicked out of heaven. It's the gamma position almost. And then you have the ideas of them, being able to defy gravity, of fairyland being all what you desire, but never quite how you worded it. You got what you wanted, but did you want what you got? And more. And never forget that our enemies are telling us who they are. You should listen to them. Got anything for us, Anthony?
Nope.
Cool. Next time we should actually have more examples of it. You guys need to read Fantastes.
We kind of decided this last second, though.
Stop.
We had this planned for weeks.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Weeks, totally. No, it's we'll see, we'll see. I've got some things to do. I've got to finish up the cover to add the cover to the ebook for Fantastic Middle Schools, which is the next Fantastic Schools
Ooh,
anthology. Which
neato.
pretty cool. Got all the right people in it. But don't forget, Fantastic Schools has my thing, Doom Garden, where the Doom Marine is a gardener for a magical school, and he's tormented by these kids who enchant his weeds. It's like, stop it, you kids! This is a anyway.
I
Uh,
have a Pinkerton story to work on because if I can get it done, we might have exciting news about Pinkerton's ghosts, but we need to be vague. It's
we do
very
need to be vague.
mysterious.
We do need to be
We
vague.
need to be extremely we need to be extremely vague. It's
As
very mysterious but potentially cool.
it
And
is,
that's all I will say.
as an editor, I have to be vague and unobtrusive at all times. Hmm. Anyway, all right, I'll let you go. Have a good night, guys, and join us